In this short documentary, we will be talking about how Napoleon's domestic policies have betrayed the French Revolution. Napoleon uses education to brainwash children into thinking that the only way of life is working for him.
Napoleon saw education as a big factor in governing France. He saw that with the right sort of education, he could indoctrinate the youth into believing his policies, and he would gain their trust and their leadership and their loyalty. Napoleon didn't trust the church schools, as he thought that they were trying to make the children anti-Napoleon. So what Napoleon did is he set up his own schools called lycées, which were mainly for army officers, as he was an officer himself. And as well as this, he set up Imperial University in France, which would govern church schools.
At the time of the French Revolution, many people based their life on their religion, and a lot of the rules in their religion did not agree with Napoleon's domestic policies.
Religion was another of Napoleon's policies. He saw it as a way he could manipulate people and increase his influence and his power over the people of France. Napoleon made an agreement with the Pope to give the Pope power over all Catholics in France. But as well as this, he also wrote into the agreement, without the Pope's consent, that Protestants would be treated as equals. This increased Napoleon's power over both the Catholics and the Protestants, as they saw him as giving them a voice. Because of this agreement, which was known as the Concordat, 30,000 priests had to rely on Napoleon for their salaries. The reason for this was that during the revolution, church land was taken away from the church and it was sold off. Now, after the Concordat, the Pope validated this ownership, and so church land wasn't governed by the church under Napoleon.
Before Napoleon's domestic policies, the French economy was really suffering due to the inefficient tax system.
One of the main reasons for Napoleon's popularity of leadership was his economic policies. Previously, the tax system was dealt with by the local departments. Now this meant that not all the tax was getting to the government, which meant that they were still quite poor, the French. Napoleon centralised the tax system. This meant that all the tax was being sent to the government directly. Now because of this, the tax revenue in France was up to date within 1 year. As well as this revolutionisation of the tax system, Napoleon introduced, with the help of some investors, the Bank of France. This new bank would help the economy of France even more, strengthening it even so much so that they was able to introduce gold and silver coins.
The laws in France are based on the constitution, so when Napoleon makes changes to the constitution, there will also be changes to the law.
His policy of the changing of the constitution played a massive part. Napoleon made sure that the first consul had the most power. He also claimed the right to appoint government officials. Now this meant that to keep their posts, they would have had to stay loyal to Napoleon. As well as this, in any vote that was ever made, the army was given an automatic yes vote. He also introduced political assemblies, but he chose to ignore them and rule by decree. This was known as Senatus Consulatum.
As part of Napoleon's self-promotion, Napoleon came up with a new set of laws, and he called them Code Napoleon.
Code Napoleon was one of the first set of laws which tried to unify the whole of France. Napoleon saw the differences, in the laws of the different departments, and he saw how this could cause difficulties when trying to prosecute especially people who were against Napoleon's reign. Most of the laws were to clarify property ownership, but however they were very authoritarian, stressing that the man has the power and that the woman is below.
Napoleon used propaganda and censorship to portray himself as the perfect emperor.
Another of Napoleon's domestic policies was propaganda and censorship. Napoleon closed down many of the Parisian newspapers and replaced them with his own called Le Moniteur. Now, Le Moniteur was written mostly by Napoleon and his government, which meant that it would be wholly unreliable for the people, as all it would portray is the good in Napoleon. Any newspapers that wasn't closed down had to rely on government reports for what they was going to write in their newspapers. So this was effectively making every newspaper Le Moniteur. As well as this, Napoleon gave honours such as the Legion of France to artists who portrayed him in a positive light.
As one of Napoleon's new domestic policies, Napoleon made new laws.
As well as giving himself the power to appoint government officials, he also gave himself the power to appoint judges. Now this meant that to keep their post, they would have had to also stay loyal to Napoleon. It also meant that any people prosecuted would have been prosecuted in favour of Napoleon. Napoleon also set up these special courts, which were mainly for political opponents. And here, these courts, these special courts were outside the judicial system, which meant there wouldn't be a jury at any of their cases. Their job was to spy on the public of France. This was similar to the special police that Hitler set up in his reign. He also gave himself the power to imprison people without trial or without cause. This act was one which was banned by the revolutionaries. Another change Napoleon made to law was that trade unions were banned. This meant that workers couldn't get their say in their job. They couldn't ask for better pay or better working conditions. Workers also had to carry livres, which are books, which detailed their work exploits.